Imagine living every single day knowing that one wrong word, one suspicious glance, one tiny mistake could end with your body swinging from a rope in a public square. Now imagine doing this voluntarily, leaving behind your wife, your children, and your entire identity to become someone else entirely. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Eli Cohen, the man who infiltrated the inner circle of Israel's most dangerous enemy and changed the course of Middle Eastern history forever. What he accomplished in just 4 years of deep cover work is so extraordinary that military historians still study his methods today. His intelligence directly saved thousands of lives and helped win a war that reshaped the entire region. But the price he paid was unimaginable, and the way his story ended would send shockwaves across the world. The year was 1960, and Israel was surrounded. To the north sat Syria, a nation consumed with hostility toward the Jewish state. Syrian forces regularly shelled Israeli farmers working in the valleys below the Golan Heights, turning agricultural settlements into war zones. Israel's military planners faced a terrifying problem. They had almost no intelligence about Syrian military positions, fortifications, or strategic plans. The Golan Heights towered above Israeli territory like a fortress, and hidden somewhere in those hills were the guns that terrorized Israeli civilians daily. Israeli intelligence knew that if war came, and everyone believed it would, thousands of soldiers would die trying to take those heights without proper intelligence. They needed someone on the inside, not just a spy who could snap a few photographs, but someone who could penetrate the highest levels of Syrian society and military command. Someone who could walk through Syrian military bases as a welcome guest. Someone who could attend parties with generals and defense ministers, earning their trust and their secrets. They needed the impossible. This is where Eli Cohen enters the story. Though when Mossad first recruited him, he seemed like an unlikely candidate for history's most daring infiltration mission. Cohen was born in Alexandria, Egypt, in 1924 to a Syrian Jewish family. He grew up speaking Arabic as his native language, understanding the culture, the mannerisms, the social codes of Arab society in a way few Israeli intelligence officers could. But his early life in Egypt was marked by the rising tide of anti-Semitism that would eventually drive most Jews from Arab lands. After Israel's establishment in 1948, life for Egyptian Jews became increasingly dangerous. Cohen worked briefly for Israeli intelligence in Egypt during the early 1950s, but that network was rolled up in a disastrous operation that ended with arrests and executions. Cohen himself narrowly escaped and emigrated to Israel in 1957. He was 33 years old, married to an Iraqi Jewish woman named Nadia, and they were starting a family. By all accounts, he could have lived a quiet, normal life working as an accountant in Tel Aviv. But Mossad saw something special in Eli Cohen. They saw a man who could pass as a native Arab, who understood the culture instinctively, who had the intelligence and charisma to move in elite circles, and perhaps most importantly, who had the courage to risk everything. When Mossad approached him in 1960 with their audacious plan, Cohen didn't hesitate for long. He understood what was at stake. He understood that Israeli children were growing up under the constant threat of Syrian artillery. He understood that without someone providing intelligence from inside Syria, the next war could cost Israel dearly, perhaps even threaten its survival. So Eli Cohen made a decision that would define his legacy. He agreed to become someone else entirely. The transformation began immediately. Mossad didn't just give Cohen a fake passport and send him off. They crafted an entire fictional life story so detailed, so carefully constructed, that it could withstand the most intense scrutiny by Syrian intelligence services, who were known to be paranoid and thorough. Cohen would become Kamal Amin Thabit, a wealthy Syrian businessman who had spent years in Argentina making his fortune in the import-export business. The legend was brilliant in its details. Argentina had a large Syrian expatriate community, which meant Thabit's story was believable. The distance meant Syrian intelligence would have difficulty verifying details. and the wealth meant Thabit would have access to the upper echelons of Syrian society from day one. But creating the legend was just the beginning. Cohen spent months training, memorizing every detail of his cover story, learning about Argentine society, perfecting his backstory until it became second nature. He studied Syrian politics, military structure, and the personalities of key figures he would need to befriend. Mossad taught him tradecraft, how to gather intelligence without arousing suspicion, how to communicate with his handlers, how to recognize surveillance, and how to operate under the crushing psychological pressure of living a lie every single moment of every single day. In early 1961, the operation began. Cohen first traveled to Argentina to establish his cover, inserting himself into the Syrian expatriate community in Buenos Aires. He attended their gatherings, made friends, donated generously to Syrian causes, and built a reputation as a successful businessman who loved his homeland and dreamed of returning. He was charming, generous, and passionately nationalistic about Syria. The expatriate community embraced him. After months of groundwork, Kamal Amin Thabit announced he was finally returning home to Damascus to invest his Argentine fortune in the motherland. When he arrived in Damascus in February 1962, he came with glowing recommendations from prominent Syrian expatriates in Argentina, with apparent wealth, and with an infectious enthusiasm for the Syrian Arab cause. The stage was set for one of the most successful intelligence operations in modern history. But Eli Cohen was walking into a country where paranoia was a way of life, where intelligence services watched everyone, and where the penalty for espionage was death by public hanging. His real work was about to begin. Damascus in 1962 was a city of suspicion and conspiracy. The Syrian government had been through multiple coups, and another would come within a year of Cohen's arrival. Intelligence services watched foreigners carefully, and wealthy returnees from abroad were particularly scrutinized. Syrian counterintelligence was amateur. They were trained by Soviet advisors and operated with the paranoid efficiency typical of Cold War security services. Eli Cohen knew that his first weeks and months in Damascus were the most dangerous. One background check that uncovered an inconsistency, one person from his past who might recognize him, one slip in his Arabic dialect or cultural knowledge, and everything would unravel. But Cohen didn't just survive those early days, he thrived. Within weeks of arriving, Kamal Amin Thabit had become one of the most popular men in Damascus among the political and military elite. Cohen's strategy was deceptively simple but required extraordinary execution. He would be the most generous, the most entertaining, and the most useful friend any Syrian official could have. He rented a luxury apartment in the prestigious Abu Ramena district, right in the heart of where government officials and military officers lived. This wasn't just about status, it was strategic positioning. His home became famous for its lavish parties where alcohol flowed freely, food was abundant, and the atmosphere was always festive. In a society where many officials had limited entertainment options and lived modestly on government salaries, Thabit's parties became the social event everyone wanted to attend. But these weren't just parties, they were intelligence gathering operations disguised as celebrations. Cohen had an extraordinary gift for making people feel important, for listening to their complaints and ambitions, for remembering details about their families and careers. Officers and officials would arrive at his apartment tense from the pressures of their positions, and after a few drinks and Thabit's welcoming presence, they would relax and talk. They would complain about their superiors, discuss military plans, gossip about political intrigues, and share information they would never dream of telling a foreign agent, because to them, Kamal Amin Thabit wasn't a foreign agent, he was a friend, a confidant, a fellow Syrian patriot who shared their dreams of a powerful Syria that would one day destroy Israel. Cohen played his role with consummate skill. He expressed passionate hatred for Israel, donated money to anti-Israel causes, and spoke eloquently about Syrian nationalism and Arab unity. He befriended journalists and used them to publish articles under Thabit's name that praised the Syrian military and called for stronger action against Israel. These articles enhanced his reputation as a patriot and opened even more doors. Within months, he had befriended mid-level military officers. Within a year, he was socializing with colonels and generals. He befriended Amin al-Hafiz, who would soon become Syria's president through a coup. He cultivated relationships with defense ministry officials who controlled access to military installations. And crucially, he never appeared curious. When military men talked about their work at his parties, Thabit listened with patriotic interest, but didn't probe too deeply. He let them volunteer information, let them boast about Syrian military superiority, let them feel important and appreciated. The intelligence flowed naturally because Cohen had created an environment where Syrian officials wanted to share information with him. But hosting parties was only part of Cohen's operation. He needed to see Syrian military installations firsthand, particularly the fortifications on the Golan Heights that threatened Israeli settlements below. This required even more audacity. Cohen began suggesting to his military friends that as a wealthy patriot who loved Syria, he wanted to see the magnificent defensive positions Syria had built against Israel. He wanted to understand how Syria would crush the Zionist enemy when war came. He expressed this desire not as an intelligence request, but as patriotic enthusiasm, even offering to donate money to improve soldiers' conditions. His officer friends were proud to show off Syrian military achievements. To such an enthusiastic supporter, they began taking him on tours of military facilities. Cohen walked through Syrian army bases, observed troop positions, noted weapon placements, and assessed defensive capabilities on the Golan Heights. He convinced his escorts to show him the fortified bunkers that housed the artillery that shelled Israeli settlements. And then Cohen made a suggestion that would become legendary in intelligence history. He proposed that Syria plant eucalyptus trees around each fortified position to provide shade for Syrian soldiers manning the bunkers in the brutal summer heat. The Syrian military thought this was a wonderful idea. It showed Thabit's concern for ordinary soldiers, and the trees would indeed provide shade. They planted eucalyptus trees around the bunkers as Cohen suggested. What Syrian commanders didn't realize was that Cohen had just marked every fortified position on the Golan Heights for Israeli targeting. When war came in 1967, Israeli forces would know exactly where to strike because each cluster of eucalyptus trees marked a Syrian bunker. The elegance of this deception is breathtaking. Cohen had convinced the Syrians to literally mark their own positions for destruction, and they thanked him for his patriotism while doing it. The intelligence Cohen gathered and transmitted back to Israel was extraordinary in its detail and strategic value. He sent information about Syrian military plans, troop deployments, weapon systems, fortification layouts, and political intrigues within the Syrian government. He identified which Syrian officers were competent and which were political appointees. He reported on Soviet military aid and training. He provided details about Syrian Air Force capabilities and airfield locations. Cohen transmitted this intelligence using a radio hidden in his apartment. Several times each week, late at night when his neighborhood was quiet, he would tap out coded messages to his Mossad handlers. This was perhaps the most dangerous part of his operation. Syrian counterintelligence had radio detection equipment, and they regularly swept Damascus looking for clandestine transmissions. Every time Cohen used his radio, he risked detection. The stress of maintaining his cover while conducting these transmissions was enormous. He was always one detection away from arrest, torture, and execution. Yet he continued for over 3 years, maintaining his double life with remarkable discipline. But Cohen was human, and the psychological toll was devastating. He couldn't tell anyone in Damascus who he really was. He couldn't trust anyone completely. Every friendship was instrumentalized for intelligence gathering. Every conversation had to be calculated. Every moment required maintaining his cover. And perhaps most painfully, he was separated from his real family, his wife Nadia, and their children back in Israel who believed he was on an extended business assignment. Cohen could never contact them directly, never explain where he truly was or what he was doing. The loneliness of his position was absolute. He lived among people who would kill him without hesitation if they knew his true identity, playing a role that could never end, cut off from everyone he loved. The isolation Cohen endured wasn't just emotional, it was existential. Every morning, he woke up as Kamal Amin Thabit, and every night, he went to bed as the same fiction. There was no moment of relief, no private space where he could simply be Eli Cohen. Even alone in his apartment, he had to maintain his cover because Syrian intelligence could have planted listening devices or surveillance. His mind became a fortress protecting his true identity. But fortresses are prisons too. The psychological pressure of this existence would have broken most people within months. Yet Cohen maintained this charade for years, and not just maintained it, he excelled at it. His performance never wavered in public. He attended parties with the same enthusiasm, cultivated friendships with the same warmth, and expressed his patriotic fervor for Syria with unwavering conviction. But the cracks were forming beneath the surface, invisible to everyone around him, but growing nonetheless. The constant state of alertness, the inability to ever truly relax, the weight of knowing that thousands of Israeli lives depended on his intelligence. All of it accumulated like a slow poison. By 1964, Cohen had become so embedded in Syrian elite circles that he was being considered for positions within the government itself. Some of his friends suggested he should be appointed to an official role in the defense ministry, or even as a liaison to the military. This was simultaneously Cohen's greatest triumph and his greatest danger. The closer he got to the center of power, the more valuable his intelligence became, but also the more intense the scrutiny. Government appointments required thorough background checks, even for someone as well-connected as Thabit. Mossad handlers monitoring Cohen's situation from Israel grew increasingly nervous. They began to consider whether it was time to extract him, to end the operation before his luck ran out. Cohen had already provided intelligence of incalculable value, enough to justify ending the mission and bringing him home safely. But Cohen insisted on continuing. He argued that he was on the verge of achieving unprecedented access, that his position was stronger than ever, and that the intelligence he could gather from within the government would be worth the risk. It was a fateful decision, one that Cohen would never get the chance to reconsider. The beginning of the end came not from any mistake Cohen made, but from technology and persistence. Syrian counterintelligence, assisted by Soviet advisors, had been conducting regular radio detection sweeps across Damascus for years. They knew that foreign intelligence services operated in Syria, and they knew that clandestine radio transmissions were a primary method of communication. The equipment they used was becoming more sophisticated, and their search patterns were becoming more systematic. In December 1964, during one of these sweeps, Syrian counterintelligence detected an unauthorized transmission in the Abu Ramena district. They couldn't pinpoint the exact location, but they had narrowed it to a specific neighborhood, the same prestigious area where Cohen lived. The counterintelligence teams began intensive monitoring, deploying detection equipment throughout the district and waiting for the transmissions to resume. Cohen, unaware that the net was closing around him, continued his regular communication schedule. He had survived 3 years of transmissions without detection, and he had no reason to believe his pattern had been compromised. In January 1965, Syrian detection teams picked up another transmission and triangulated it more precisely. They were getting closer. On the evening of January 18, 1965, Eli Cohen sat in his apartment preparing another transmission to Tel Aviv. It had been a productive period. He had gathered new intelligence about Syrian military plans and Soviet weapons deliveries that Israel needed to know immediately. He assembled his radio equipment, encoded his message, and began transmitting as he had done hundreds of times before. He didn't know that Syrian counterintelligence teams were positioned throughout his neighborhood, with detection equipment tracking his signal. He didn't know that they had narrowed the source to his building. He didn't know that as he transmitted, officers were already moving into position outside. Within minutes of beginning his transmission, there was a pounding on his door. Syrian security forces burst into the apartment before Cohen could destroy his equipment. They found him at the radio, caught in the act, with no possibility of denial. The game was over. Kamal Amin Thabit, the beloved Syrian patriot, the generous friend to generals and government ministers, ceased to exist in that moment. Only Eli Cohen remained, and he was now in the hands of one of the Middle East's most brutal security services. The interrogation that followed was savage. Syrian intelligence was absolutely shocked by what they had discovered. Some of the officers who arrested Cohen had attended his parties, had drunk his alcohol, had considered him a friend. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. But beyond the personal anger was professional horror. Syrian intelligence began to realize the scope of the disaster. They traced Cohen's movements over his years in Damascus and understood that he had penetrated the highest levels of their military and political establishment. He had toured military bases, seen fortifications, attended sensitive meetings, and befriended key officials. Everything Syrian officials had told him, every complaint they had voiced, every military detail they had mentioned at his parties, all of it had gone to Israel. The Syrians began a frantic damage assessment, trying to determine exactly what Cohen knew and what he had transmitted. Under interrogation and torture, Cohen revealed some information, but protected other details, particularly the identities of his contacts within Mossad and the full extent of his intelligence gathering. The Syrians pressed him for names of collaborators, convinced that someone with his access must have had Syrian accomplices. Cohen insisted he had worked alone, that all the friendships were his creation, that he had deceived everyone. This was partially to protect himself. Admitting to a network might have implicated innocent people and extended his torture. But it was also largely true. Cohen's operation had been a masterpiece of individual deception. The trial was a foregone conclusion. Syria put Cohen before a military tribunal in a proceeding that was less about justice and more about public spectacle. Syrian officials wanted to demonstrate that they had caught an Israeli spy and would punish him severely. They wanted to send a message to Israel and to their own population. Cohen was denied any meaningful defense, and the proceedings were designed to humiliate him and showcase Syrian security capabilities. Throughout the trial, Cohen maintained his dignity, refusing to grovel or beg for mercy. He faced his accusers with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout his years undercover. On May 18, 1965, exactly 4 months after his arrest, the tribunal sentenced Eli Cohen to death by hanging. International appeals began immediately, with multiple governments and even religious leaders appealing to Syria for clemency. But Syrian leadership was unmoved. They had decided Cohen would die, and the execution would be public. The date of execution was set for May 18, 1965, the same day the sentence was announced. Syria wasn't interested in prolonging the process or allowing time for diplomatic pressure to build. They wanted Cohen dead quickly, and they wanted the execution to be public, a message sent not just to Israel but to anyone who might consider spying against Syria. In his final hours, Cohen was allowed to write letters to his wife Nadia and his family. These letters, written by a man who knew he would be dead within hours, are heartbreaking in their dignity and love. He apologized to Nadia for the deception, for the years of absence he could never explain, for leaving her alone with their children. He expressed no regret for his mission, only sorrow for the pain his family would endure. He asked that his children be told he died serving his country, that they understand his sacrifice had meaning. These letters would eventually reach Israel, becoming treasured documents of a hero's final moments. Cohen also requested to see a rabbi and Syrian authorities, perhaps feeling some obligation to religious protocol, allowed a rabbi from Damascus's small remaining Jewish community to visit him. What they discussed in those final private moments remains unknown, but those who saw Cohen afterward reported that he appeared calm, resigned to his fate, and spiritually prepared for death. At dawn on May 18th, Syrian authorities transported Eli Cohen to Marya Square in central Damascus. They had erected a gallows in the square, and thousands of people had gathered to witness the execution. Syrian state media had announced the hanging, framing it as justice for a dangerous Israeli spy who had infiltrated Syrian society. The crowd was a mix of curious onlookers, government officials, and people genuinely angry at the deception Cohen had perpetrated. Syrian television cameras were positioned to broadcast the execution, ensuring maximum propaganda value. Cohen was led to the gallows wearing a brown suit, his hands bound behind his back. Witnesses reported that he walked calmly, showing no outward fear, maintaining his composure even as he faced the rope that would end his life. Syrian officials read the charges against him one final time, listing his crimes of espionage and betrayal. Then they asked if he had any final words. Cohen spoke briefly in Arabic, addressing the crowd. Reports vary on exactly what he said, but most accounts agree that he refused to apologize or recant, instead maintaining his dignity and accepting his fate. Some witnesses claimed he recited the Shema, the central Jewish prayer affirmed in moments of martyrdom. At approximately 3:30 in the morning, the execution was carried out. Eli Cohen was hanged in Marya Square, his body left hanging for hours as a gruesome warning. He was 41 years old. The news of Cohen's execution reached Israel and sent shockwaves through the nation. The Israeli public had known nothing of Cohen's mission while it was ongoing. His work was classified at the highest levels. But now a story began to emerge, and Israelis learned about the extraordinary spy who had lived among their enemies, gathering intelligence that would prove crucial to their survival. Cohen was immediately recognized as a national hero, though the full details of his accomplishments remained classified for years. His widow Nadia became a symbol of sacrifice, a woman who had lost her husband to a secret mission she hadn't even known he was undertaking. She spent the rest of her life advocating for the return of her husband's remains, which Syria refused to repatriate despite numerous requests from Israel and international mediators. Even decades later, Syria continued to refuse, keeping Cohen's body as a final act of spite. Nadia Cohen died in 2022, never having achieved her goal of burying her husband in Israel, though she never stopped fighting for it. The true magnitude of Cohen's achievement became clear just 2 years after his death. In June 1967, the Six-Day War erupted between Israel and its Arab neighbors, when Israeli forces moved against Syrian positions on the Golan Heights. They did so with detailed intelligence about every fortification, every bunker, every defensive position. The eucalyptus trees Cohen had suggested planting became targeting markers for Israeli artillery and airstrikes. Syrian positions that should have been nearly impregnable were neutralized quickly, because Israeli commanders knew exactly where they were and how they were constructed. The battle for the Golan Heights, which could have cost thousands of Israeli lives, was won with relatively light casualties in large part because of the intelligence Eli Cohen had provided. Israeli forces captured the heights that had terrorized their settlements for nearly 2 decades, and Syria lost its strategic advantage over northern Israel. Military historians analyzing the Six-Day War consistently identify Cohen as intelligence as a crucial factor in Israel's victory. Some have argued that his work saved thousands of lives and possibly prevented Israel's defeat. The information he gathered at such tremendous personal cost had achieved exactly what Mossad had hoped for when they sent him into Syria. Today, Eli Cohen is remembered as one of history's greatest spies, a man who accomplished what seemed impossible and paid the ultimate price for his success. His story has been told in books, films, and television series, most recently in a major production starring Sacha Baron Cohen. Streets in Israel are named after him, and his photograph appears in the Mossad headquarters as an inspiration to new intelligence officers. But beyond the legend is the human story of a man who chose to leave everything behind, to live a lie so complete that it consumed his identity, to sacrifice not just his life but years of his life in constant danger and isolation. Cohen's legacy raises profound questions about sacrifice, duty, and the cost of protecting one's nation. He was a spy, yes, but he was also a husband who couldn't tell his wife where he was, a father who missed his children growing up, a man who lived in absolute loneliness surrounded by people who would have killed him if they knew the truth. The story of Eli Cohen reminds us that history has pivotal moments often depend on individuals willing to risk everything for something larger than themselves. His courage, his skill, and his sacrifice changed the course of Middle Eastern history and saved countless lives. If you found this story as compelling as we did, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because we'll be bringing you more incredible true stories of espionage, courage, and the hidden operations that shaped our world. Share this video with anyone who appreciates real-life stories that are more thrilling than any fiction. And let us know in the comments what other intelligence operations you'd like us to cover. The world of espionage is filled with remarkable individuals whose stories deserve to be told. And we're just getting started. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.